Okay, so you may have heard this term of having a good fireball game, which usually denotes that the way this player is using his fireball is outstanding, but you might not understand what the hell they mean by that. So first, let me talk about the concept of using fireballs as a poke and not a projectile. This is Ryu, ordinary guy. Ryu probably has the most average fireball in Street Fighter, and as a projectile it's nothing amazing. You can shoot it from afar to keep people out, which is what everyone's first thought is in using a fireball. The real strength of Ryu's fireball is when used at closer distances. Ryu's normals don't have the furthest reach compared to the rest of the roster, but he can always theoretically outzone every one of these pokes using his fireball instead. Because in neutral, players aim to fight to be in the right place at the right time in order to be in the position to poke or whiff punish each other's pokes, also known as footsies. But with the use of close range fireballs, you can use it as a far reaching poke instead. Using the fireball this way can counter your opponent's ability to poke effectively and allow you to beat pokes that your normals normally wouldn't. So now, if you're like me, you're like, wow, damn, Ryu's so cool because he's like the best footsie character now because he can like have the longest range. And if you have the longest range in footsies, you're guaranteed to be the winner. But just like most other projectiles, someone can always jump over them to punish you, especially since using fireballs as a poke requires you to stand closer to the opponent in order to outpoke your opponents, which means you're even more susceptible to jump in punishes than before, because you're always well within range. Okay, so you might be thinking, wow, the risk of using fireballs like this is like way too high. Fireball damage versus like one whole jump in combo? But because of this close distance you maintain to use fireballs as pokes, it's near impossible to be able to jump out of the fireball's way upon reaction. So the only way to get over a fireball, especially if it travels fast, is for the opponent to make the read to jump over the fireball to get a punish. This is where your fireballs have paid off, and you can cash out on the damage with an anti-air and punish their guess attempt instead of shooting a fireball. So waiting to anti-air obviously requires you not to be in the middle of doing something else, so you have to make a commitment to wait for it. Why this option is additionally strong is that if they didn't make the guess to jump in and just sit there instead, there's very little loss in waiting, as the worst the opponent can do is to poke back at you, which you can just block, or do something else that you can react to, such as them dashing in or walking in, so you can just poke back. Basically, it's very low risk to just wait anyway. So with the opponent conditioned to not poke back, and they're less inclined to jump, this will grant you more space to do the last rock, paper, scissors option, which is to just go back to square one and go on the offense yourself, by either by poking them, or just drive rushing in and doing frame trap or throw mix-ups. Okay, so now let me just recap this all into a rock, paper, scissors game like I just mentioned before. So normally when the matches start, people usually try to like feel each other out and see what other people do. Are they like the crazy kind of guy, or they're more conservative? So when people start poking to try to feel that out, the fireball can counter these pokes with this extended reach. But poking with fireballs can be countered by using jumps. But jumps can be countered by anti-airing. And waiting for anti-airs are countered by giving allowance to your opponent to attack you. So this is a read-based strategy, and it requires the player to get a feel for how your opponent thinks at like the given time so you can properly counter it. And while it introduces some risks like getting a full jump in combo, ultimately what it lets you do is that it lets you outrange your opponent's normals, which is something that your character will need desperately in certain matchups and less in some other matchups. So that's basically it for the basic concept of this strategy and using fireballs as a poke. It's like a very general idea of what the fireball game is, but you're probably thinking at this point that I didn't talk about a bunch of other twists that certain characters can do and what Street Fighter 6's system mechanics allow for. So firstly, right off the bat, the most obvious one is Drive Impact. And Drive Impact can blow through fireballs without the need to jump and get anti-aired, but while it's a strong option, it's not impossible to beat. The start of a Drive Impact is so slow that you can still react to a random raw DI in neutral while waiting for a possible jump. The good thing about it for the attacker is that it's safe on block for the opponent, and it might be tougher to react to, but if you treat this like you're waiting for a jump and practice your reaction, it's really not too bad. Of course, in Street Fighter 6, there's also Drive Rush, which puts more pressure on the people who are waiting for an anti-air. This can enable for like an immediate mix-up opportunity with his plus frames if it isn't checked or stopped. So while it can be interrupted, some characters' drive rush accelerate way faster than others, which makes it really hard to check. So this poses a bit of an increased risk if you're willing to wait around for a jump. Alright, another thing I didn't mention is that some characters just straight up have an anti-fireball tool that they can use. This is going to be more matchup specific, and it's simply something that you just have to look out for against certain characters. Jumping is just a universal answer, but some characters might have a specific tool instead of jumping, like DI. But you'll just have to be more judicious of when you're chucking plasma. But remember, it's a read-based strategy, so get ready to adapt to whatever the opponent is going to do instead of just mindlessly throwing more fireballs. You have to sit there and think. Finally, the last footnote I want to mention is that some characters have better or worse fireball than Ryu's. Luke's Sandblast recovers much quicker than Ryu's fireball, and also travels way faster. Sandblast's only weakness is that he can only travel so far in distance depending on which punch you press, but overall this really complements Luke's short range of buttons, and it makes him play like an upgraded Shoto. Guile's Sonic Boom is notorious for its amazingly short recovery, what makes it really difficult to perform any kind of anti-fireball technique on him. So just don't jump on Guile, especially when he's charged. So yeah, use fireballs as pokes. It's really good. Opens up a lot of opportunities.